If no one comes for you, then something else will. The thought didn't feel like hers anymore. It echoed in the hollow silence as Emily Carter pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her breath thin and uneven. She had stopped counting hours sometime after the third day. Now there was only the slow drip of water somewhere in the dark and the faint hum of pipes above her head, reminding her the world was still moving without her. No light reached this place. Not even a crack, not even a shadow. Just endless gray that swallowed everything, including time. Her fingers trembled as they traced the lines carved into the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each mark shallow and uneven, carved with a rusted nail she'd found on the floor. Day 7. Her stomach twisted painfully, but even hunger felt distant now, like her body was slowly forgetting what it needed. She swallowed, and her throat burned dry. Her lips barely moved when she tried to speak. No sound came. Footsteps had stopped days ago. Daniel used to come down here at first, his voice calm and controlled, explaining why she needed to stay here, why it was better for both of them, why she needed to learn. But the visits became shorter, then colder, then gone completely. Now there was only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Emily closed her eyes, though it made no difference, and tried to remember what sunlight felt like, the warmth on her skin, the way it used to filter through the kitchen window in the mornings. She remembered thinking her life was small but safe. She almost laughed at that now, but no sound came, just a weak breath that faded too quickly. Her body sagged against the wall, her strength slipping away inch by inch. And then, through the fog in her mind, something surfaced. A memory, not loud, not urgent, just persistent. Her grandmother's voice, soft but firm, from years ago. There are words you must never say unless you are ready to be seen. Emily's brow furrowed slightly, the memory flickering like a dying light. She hadn't understood it back then. It sounded like one of those strange old warnings that didn't belong in the modern world. But now, in the dark, in the quiet, it felt different. It felt real. Her fingers curled weakly against the floor as she tried to recall the words. They were buried deep somewhere between memory and instinct. She shook her head faintly. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. Her breathing slowed, her chest barely rising and falling. But the voice came again, clearer this time. When there is nothing left, you call. Emily's lips parted slightly, a dry whisper barely forming. She didn't know why she remembered. She didn't know why she cared, but something inside her refused to let go, refused to fade quietly into the dark. Her heart gave a weak, unsteady beat as the words surfaced, strange and unfamiliar, shaped by sounds she didn't recognize. Her throat tightened. Every instinct told her not to say them, told her this wasn't meant for someone like her, but she had nothing left to lose. Her voice broke as the first syllable slipped out, barely audible, barely real. The air shifted instantly, subtle but undeniable, like the room itself had taken a breath. The temperature dropped, and the faint hum of the pipes above went silent. Emily's eyes fluttered open, though she could see nothing different. Her pulse quickened, weak but sudden, as the rest of the words followed, slipping past her lips in a fragile whisper that didn't belong to this place. The moment the final word left her mouth, the darkness answered, not with sound but with presence, something vast, something ancient, something aware, far beyond the walls of the house, beyond the city, beyond everything. A figure stilled in a distant throne room, eyes opening slowly after centuries of stillness, crimson light flickering beneath pale lids, as a voice, not spoken but felt, echoed through the void. Who calls me? Back in the basement, the lock on the door clicked softly. Emily didn't move. She couldn't. But the silence was no longer empty. It was watching, and for the first time in days, something inside her stirred. Not hope, not yet, but something colder, something far more dangerous. The silence did not break. It deepened, pressing in from every side until it felt alive. Emily Carter lay motionless against the cold floor, her breath shallow, her pulse uneven, but now there was something else beneath it, something she could not name. The air no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, watching, waiting. The faint click of the lock echoed again, this time louder, sharper, like metal surrendering. To something it did not understand. Emily's fingers twitched weakly against the concrete as the sound repeated once, twice, then stopped completely. The door did not open. Not yet, but the barrier between her and the world above was no longer solid. She could feel it like a crack in reality itself. Miles away, in a place untouched by time, Lucien Voss stood from his throne, slowly, deliberately, as if the very act had not been required for centuries. The vast chamber around him remained frozen in silence, ancient stone pillars rising into darkness, torches flickering without warmth. His crimson gaze fixed on something far beyond the physical world. He did not move quickly. He never needed to. Power did not rush. It arrived when it chose. But something in that whisper had not been a request. It had been a pull, a call written in a language older than memory, older than kingdoms, older than him. His hand lifted slightly, fingers curling as if testing an invisible thread, and there it was, unmistakable, a connection, fragile but undeniable. Impossible. His voice was low, quiet, yet it carried through the chamber like a command. The air itself seemed to react, bending subtly to his presence. No one had spoken that language in centuries. No human should have known it. And yet the echo remained clear in his mind, soft, broken, but real. Emily Carter. He repeated the name silently, tasting it as if it held meaning he had forgotten. And then, without another word, he moved. Not walking, not rushing, simply existing somewhere else, the space around him shifting as if the world itself made room for his will. Back in the basement, Emily felt it before she heard anything. The temperature dropped sharply, her breath forming faint clouds in the darkness, her skin prickling as if a storm was building inside the walls above her. Footsteps returned, sudden, hurried. Daniel's voice broke through the silence from the other side of the door, tight, controlled, but edged with something new, something uncertain. Emily, he called, not loud, not gentle, just enough to confirm she was still there, still under his control. A pause followed, then the rattle of the handle. He tried it once, then again, harder, but the door did not respond. The lock had already given way to something greater. What did you do? His voice sharpened now, closer to panic than anger. Emily did not answer. She could not. Her strength was nearly gone, but her eyes remained open, fixed on the darkness as it began to change. The shadows near the far wall shifted, not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough to be wrong, like a reflection that did not match its source. Daniel stepped back from the door above, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He did not open it, not yet. Something held him there, some instinct telling him that whatever waited on the other side was no longer his to control. The silence stretched again, heavier than before, and then the door opened, not with force, not with sound, but with inevitability. It moved slowly, the hinges silent, revealing nothing but deeper darkness beyond. Daniel took one step back, then another, his breathing uneven now as the air around him seemed to thin. The temperature dropped further. The light from the hallway flickered once, twice, then steadied, but weaker, as if drained. Emily felt it then, not fear, not pain. Something colder, something vast filling the space around her, a presence that did not belong to this world. A figure stood at the threshold, tall, still, outlined only by absence, where light refused to exist. Daniel's voice failed him completely now, reduced to a whisper that carried no authority. Who are you? The answer did not come immediately. It did not need to. The figure stepped forward once, and the space itself seemed to shift to accommodate him. And when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, controlled, ancient beyond understanding. You already know. Emily's heartbeat faltered, then steadied, stronger than it had been moments ago, as if responding to him, not to fear, but to recognition. Lucien Voss moved further into the room, his gaze settling on her, not scanning, not searching, simply knowing. And for the first time in centuries, something in his expression changed, not warmth, not kindness, but something far more dangerous, interest. You should not exist, he said quietly, as the air around them stilled completely, and nothing in that house would ever be the same again. Daniel could not move. The question he had asked hung in the air unanswered, but it did not matter. The answer was already pressing down on him in a way he could not explain. His breath came shallow, his chest tight, as if the room itself had turned against him. The figure stepped fully into the basement, and the darkness followed, not spreading, not consuming, but obeying, bending around him like it recognized its master. Lucien Voss did not look at Daniel again, not yet. His attention remained fixed on Emily Carter, as if everything else in the room had already been decided. Her body lay weak against the cold floor, but her eyes were open now, clearer than before, the faint rise and fall of her chest steadier than it had been moments ago, as if the mere presence of him was changing something fundamental within her. You spoke the old words. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Not loud, not threatening, just absolute. Emily tried to respond. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat was too dry, her strength too thin, but her gaze did not leave his, and that alone was enough. Lucien tilted his head slightly, studying her as if she were something impossible, something that should not exist, yet undeniably did. His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, to the faint marks carved into her skin, not wounds, not harm, just traces of something ancient, something that did not belong to this world. No human remembers that language, he said, more to himself than to her. Daniel finally found his voice again, though it came weaker than before. You need to leave, he said, stepping forward just enough to reclaim some sense of control, though it was already gone. This is my house. The words sounded hollow even to him. Lucien did not turn immediately. He did not need to. The silence stretched for a moment longer before he shifted his attention just slightly, enough for Daniel to feel it like a weight pressing against his chest. Your house, Lucien repeated softly, as if testing the meaning of the phrase. His eyes moved toward Daniel finally, not with anger, not with interest, but with something far colder, indifference. You built walls and believed that made you powerful. Daniel swallowed hard, his confidence slipping further with every second. You have no right to be here, he insisted, but his voice betrayed him. Lucien stepped forward once more, and the distance between them meant nothing. Space itself seemed to bend under his will. Rights are human inventions, he said calmly. They do not apply to me. The light from the hallway flickered again, dimmer now, as if struggling to exist in his presence. Daniel took another step back, his hand brushing against the wall as if searching for something solid, something real, but there was nothing left in the room that belonged to him anymore. Lucien's attention returned to Emily just as quickly as it had shifted away, kneeling slightly, not fully, just enough to bring himself closer to her level. His movements were precise, controlled, never rushed. His pale hand hovered near her face, but did not touch. Not yet. Why you? He asked quietly, not as a demand, but as a question that carried centuries of weight. Emily's lips moved again. This time, a faint sound escaped, barely more than a breath. I did not know, she whispered, the words fragile but real. Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition, as if her answer confirmed something deeper, something he had not yet spoken aloud. The air around them shifted again, softer this time, less oppressive, more focused, as if the entire world had narrowed down to this single moment, this single connection. Daniel shook his head, stepping back further toward the stairs. This is not real, he muttered to himself, his voice unsteady. This is not possible. Lucien did not respond to him, not with words, not with action, because he no longer mattered. The room had already decided that. Emily's breathing steadied further, her body still weak, but no longer fading, the cold no longer biting as deeply as it had before. Lucien straightened slightly, his gaze still locked on her. You did not call for help, he said quietly. You activated something far older than that. Emily's brow furrowed faintly, confusion mixing with the fragile awareness returning to her. I just wanted to live, she whispered. Lucien held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his expression before it settled into something calm, something certain. That is why it answered, he said softly. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was charged, filled with something waiting, something inevitable. And for the first time since the door had opened, Emily realized this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The room did not return to normal. It shifted into something quieter, more controlled, as if every movement, every breath, now existed under an unseen rule. Emily Carter felt it in the way the air no longer pressed against her butt, moved around her, guided, shaped by a presence that refused to leave. Lucien Voss remained where he was, his gaze steady, unreadable, but no longer distant. There was something else there now, something sharper, more focused, like a question that had waited centuries for an answer. Emily tried to push herself up, her arms trembling as they struggled against the cold floor, but before she could fall back, his hand moved, not touching, just hovering close enough that the effort became easier. Her breath caught, not in fear but in confusion, as strength returned in small, fragile waves. Do not rush it. His voice was softer now, not gentle, but precise, as if he understood exactly how much she could endure and no more. Daniel stood near the stairs, frozen between leaving and staying, his mind struggling to catch up to what was happening. His eyes darted between them, between the impossible stillness of Lucien and the slow recovery of Emily, as if trying to force logic onto something that refused to obey it. You cannot just take her, he said finally, his voice uneven but louder now, desperation bleeding into it. She is my wife. The word hung in the air, but it no longer held meaning. Not here, not now. Lucien did not react immediately. He did not need to. The silence stretched long enough for the weight of that statement to collapse on its own before he spoke. You speak as if ownership defines existence. His tone remained calm, but there was something colder beneath it, something that did not recognize the concept at all. Daniel clenched his jaw, his hand tightening against the wall as he took a step forward, trying to reclaim ground he no longer had. She belongs here, he insisted, but the words sounded weaker with every second. Lucien's gaze shifted slightly toward him again, not with anger, not even with interest, but with finality. No, he said simply. The single word carried more force than any raised voice ever could, and the room seemed to accept it instantly. Daniel stopped mid-step, his body refusing to move further, as if something invisible held him in place. Not force, not pain, just an undeniable barrier. Emily felt the shift again, stronger this time, her body no longer trembling as it had before, the cold that once clung to her skin fading, replaced by something steady, something grounding. She managed to sit up slowly, her back pressing against the wall, her eyes never leaving Lucien. What happens now? Her voice was still weak, but clearer than before. The question lingered in the air, heavier than anything Daniel had said. Lucien looked at her fully now, not as a puzzle, not as an anomaly, but as something real, something present in his world. Now, he repeated softly, as if the word itself required consideration. His gaze moved briefly to the walls, to the space around her, to the remnants of what had confined her, and then back to her. Now you decide if you remain what you were. Emily's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. Or, he continued, his voice lowering slightly, if you become what answered. The words settled deep, not loud, not dramatic, but impossible to ignore. Daniel shook his head again, stepping back further toward the stairs, his instincts finally overriding his pride. This is insane, he muttered, turning slightly as if preparing to leave, to escape whatever had taken over his house. But the moment he moved, the light above flickered sharply, plunging the upper steps into shadow. He stopped again, unwilling to move forward into something he could not see. Lucien did not look at him this time, because he no longer needed to. Emily's attention remained locked on Lucien, her breathing steady now, her thoughts beginning to clear as the weight of his words settled in. I do not understand, she admitted quietly. Lucien held her gaze for a long moment, something ancient passing through his expression before it stilled completely. You were not meant to, he said. And yet you did. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with something waiting, something inevitable, as the space between them narrowed, not physically, but in meaning, in purpose, in something far deeper than either of them had spoken aloud. And for the first time, Emily realized that whatever had been awakened in that moment was not something she could simply walk away from. It had already chosen her. The silence tightened again, but this time it did not feel empty. It felt like a decision waiting to be made. Emily Carter sat against the wall, her body no longer failing but not yet whole, her breath steady, her mind clearing with each passing second. Yet the weight of Lucien Voss's words remained anchored deep inside her chest. She could feel it. Something had changed, not just around her but within her, as if a door she never knew existed had been forced open and now refused to close. Become what answered, she repeated quietly, the phrase unfamiliar yet strangely resonant. Her fingers curled slightly against the floor, no longer trembling as before. Lucien watched her closely, not impatient, not demanding, simply observing, as though her next choice mattered more than anything else in that moment. Above them, Daniel shifted again, his steps uncertain as he hovered near the stairs, his eyes fixed on the scene below, unable to leave, unable to stay. This ends now, he said suddenly, his voice sharper than before, as if forcing strength back into himself. You do not get to decide anything for her. The words echoed down into the basement, but they felt smaller than before, weaker, like they no longer belonged to him. Lucien did not move immediately. His gaze remained on Emily, as if Daniel's voice had not reached him at all. But then, slowly, almost lazily, his attention shifted once more. You continue to misunderstand your place, he said calmly. There was no anger in his tone, only certainty. Daniel swallowed hard but forced himself to step down one stair, then another, the light above flickering faintly with each movement. She is coming with me, he insisted, though the words trembled at the edges. Whatever this is, it is over. Lucien stood then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a smooth, controlled motion that seemed to alter the space around him. The temperature dropped slightly again, not enough to freeze, but enough to remind the room who held control. Over, Lucien repeated softly, as if considering the idea before dismissing it entirely. You believe endings are yours to declare. Daniel stopped halfway down the stairs, his hand gripping the railing tightly, his breath uneven, his confidence thinning with every word. Lucien took a single step forward, and the distance between them felt irrelevant, as if space itself no longer mattered. You created a cage and called it a life, he continued, his voice still calm, still quiet, yet impossible to ignore. You removed choice and called it order. Daniel shook his head quickly, as if rejecting the words outright. You do not know anything about us, he snapped, though the force behind it faltered. Lucien's gaze did not waver. I know enough, he said simply, and that was the end of it. Emily felt the shift again, stronger now, more defined, not just around her, but inside her chest. Her heartbeat steady, firm, no longer fragile. She pushed herself up further until she was sitting upright without support, her body still weak, but no longer collapsing. Her eyes moved between them, between the man who had controlled her world and the one who had shattered it without effort. He is right about one thing, she said quietly, her voice no longer breaking. Daniel froze, his attention snapping to her immediately. Emily, he said quickly, relief flashing across his face, as if her voice meant she was still within his reach. Tell him to leave. We can fix this. She looked at him then, truly looked, for the first time in what felt like years, not through fear, not through habit, but with clarity. And what she saw no longer held power over her. No, she said softly, the words simple but absolute. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Daniel stared at her, as if he had not understood, as if the answer did not fit the version of her he believed existed. You do not decide for me anymore, she continued, her voice steady even as her body remained weak. Lucien did not speak. He did not need to. The shift had already happened. The moment had already passed. Daniel stepped back instinctively, his grip loosening on the railing as something inside him finally recognized what had changed. This was no longer his house, not his control, not his reality. Emily turned her gaze back to Lucien, her expression uncertain but resolved. I do not know what I am becoming, she admitted quietly. Lucien held her gaze for a long moment before responding. Neither do I, he said, and for the first time, there was something in his voice that was not absolute, not certain, but curious. And that was far more dangerous than anything else. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Neither do I. It did not sound like uncertainty. It sounded like something awakening, something that had not been felt in centuries. Emily Carter held his gaze, trying to understand what it meant for someone like him to not know anything. The idea itself felt impossible, yet here it was, standing in front of her, shaping the Space around her, as if the world itself was listening. Daniel let out a slow breath behind them, the tension in his body shifting from control to something closer to fear. Real fear, the kind that stripped away denial. "This is over," he said again, but the words no longer carried weight. They fell flat against the walls and disappeared. Lucien did not respond immediately. Instead, his attention returned fully to Emily, as if Daniel had already been erased from the equation. "Stand," he said quietly, not a command, not forceful, just a simple statement of expectation. Emily hesitated for only a moment before her hands pressed against the floor. Her muscles protested, weak but responsive. She pushed upward slowly, her balance unsteady at first, her legs trembling beneath her, but they held. Lucien did not touch her, yet the space around her seemed to support her movements, like invisible hands guiding her just enough to keep her from falling. When she finally stood fully upright, the room felt different, smaller somehow, as if she no longer belonged to the place that had confined her. Daniel stared at her, disbelief clear in his expression. "Emily, you cannot just walk away," he said quickly, stepping down the remaining stairs, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "We can fix this. We can go back to how things were." She turned her head toward him slowly, her expression calm but distant, as if she were looking at something that no longer had meaning. "There is nothing to go back to," she said, her voice steady, not loud, not angry, just final. The silence that followed pressed heavily against the walls. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came this time. Lucien took a step closer to Emily, his presence now undeniable, not overwhelming, but absolute. "You are still tied to this place," he said, his eyes scanning the room briefly before returning to her. "Not by walls, not by him, but by what you were forced to become." Emily felt it, the truth of his words settling deep inside her chest. Something unseen still connected her to this house, to the space, to the version of herself that had nearly faded away. "How do I break it?" she asked quietly. Lucien's gaze sharpened slightly, not with intensity, but with focus. "You do not break it," he said. "You outgrow it." The words settled differently, heavier, yet clearer. Emily's fingers curled at her sides as she tried to understand what that meant. Not physically, not logically, but something deeper, something instinctive. The air shifted again, subtly, like a current moving through the room. Daniel stepped back instinctively, his body reacting before his mind could process it. "What does that even mean?" he demanded, his voice strained. "She is not going anywhere." Lucien finally turned to face him fully, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with quiet finality. "You continue to speak as if you have a choice," he said calmly. Daniel shook his head, backing toward the stairs again, his confidence unraveling completely now. "You cannot just take someone out of their life like this," he insisted, but even he no longer believed it. Lucien held his gaze for a brief moment before answering. "I am not taking her," he said. "She is leaving." The distinction was subtle, but absolute, and the room seemed to accept it instantly. Emily felt the shift again, stronger this time, her heartbeat steady, her breath even, the weakness in her body fading further with every passing second. She took one step forward, then another, each movement easier than the last, as if something inside her had already begun to change. The space behind her felt distant now, irrelevant, like a memory that no longer had control. Daniel reached out slightly, his hand stopping midair, as if something prevented him from going further. "Emily, wait," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. She paused, not turning back, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the sound. "You never saw me," she said quietly. "Not really." The words were not cruel, they were not emotional, they were simply true. Lucien watched her closely, something unreadable passing through his expression as she spoke. And when she moved again, stepping toward the open doorway, the air itself seemed to part for her, as if recognizing her decision as something final, something irreversible. And for the first time since the darkness had answered her call, Emily realized she was not being saved. She was being transformed. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the house reacted, not violently, not suddenly, but with a quiet resistance, like something old refusing to let go. Emily Carter felt it wrap around her ankles, not physically, but in memory, in weight, in everything that had once kept her still. Her breath faltered for a second, not from weakness, but from the pressure of what she was leaving behind. Lucien Voss did not move to help her. He did not need to. His presence remained steady behind her, not pushing, not pulling, simply there, as if the outcome had already been decided long before this moment. "It will try to hold you," he said quietly, his voice calm, almost distant. Emily did not look back. She could not. If she did, she knew something inside her might hesitate, and hesitation no longer belonged to her. "Then it can try," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands tightened slightly at her sides. The air around her shifted again, warmer near the doorway, colder behind her, like two worlds refusing to exist in the same space. Daniel stood frozen at the base of the stairs, his face pale, his eyes locked on her, as if memorizing something he was about to lose forever. "You are making a mistake," he said, his voice lower now, not commanding, not controlling, just desperate. Emily paused for half a second, the words reaching her but not settling. "No," she said quietly. "I stayed too long. That was the mistake." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before, because it carried truth. Daniel took a step forward, then stopped again, as if something invisible reminded him he could not cross the same distance she was crossing. Not anymore. Emily inhaled slowly. The air near the doorway felt different, clearer, lighter, like it belonged to a world she had almost forgotten existed. She took another step forward, and this time the resistance weakened, the invisible weight loosening its hold. Not gone, but fading. Lucien watched closely, his gaze sharp, not in tension, but in recognition, as if he had seen this moment before in a different time, in a different form. "It is breaking," he said softly, not to her, but as an observation. Emily felt it too, something inside her chest shifting, aligning, not painfully, not forcefully, just changing. Her heartbeat steadied further, each step forward making it stronger, not faster, just more certain. She reached the final step out of the basement and paused again, not because she had to, but because something told her this was the last moment where she could still turn back. Daniel's voice came again, quieter than ever. "Emily, please." There was nothing left in it now, no control, no certainty, just a fragile request that came too late. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again and stepped forward fully into the light. The shift was immediate, not dramatic, but absolute. The house behind her felt distant already, like something she had outgrown without realizing it. The air around her was no longer heavy, no longer watching, just still. Lucien moved then, not rushing, not closing the distance quickly, just stepping into the same space she now occupied. His presence no longer confined to the darkness below, but blending seamlessly into the light without losing any of its depth. Emily turned slightly to face him, now standing fully upright, her posture steady, her breathing even, the weakness that once defined her nearly gone. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. Lucien studied her for a moment longer, his gaze moving from her eyes to her hands to the subtle shift in her stance before returning to her face. "No," he said simply. The answer did not bring fear, it brought clarity. Emily nodded slowly, as if she had expected it. "Then what is this?" she asked. Lucien's expression remained calm, but something beneath it shifted, something that had not been there before. Not curiosity, not interest, something closer to recognition. "This is the moment you stopped being what they made you," he said quietly. The words settled between them, steady, unshakable. Emily let out a slow breath, not relief, not exhaustion. Something deeper, something quieter, as if a part of her had finally aligned with itself. Behind them, the basement remained open, the darkness still there, but no longer reaching, no longer calling. Daniel did not follow. He did not speak again, because something inside him understood what had happened. This was not something he could undo. This was not something he could control. Lucien turned his gaze toward the open space ahead of them, beyond the house, beyond the life she had known, his voice lower now, but no less certain. "What comes next?" he said, will not ask for permission. Emily looked forward as well, the unknown stretching out in front of her, not empty, not safe, but undeniably hers. And for the first time, she did not feel small standing at its edge. She felt ready. The world above did not welcome her with noise or chaos. It welcomed her with something far more unsettling: stillness. Emily Carter stood just beyond the doorway, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dim natural light that filtered through the narrow windows. The air felt different here, thinner, yet somehow fuller, like it carried something unseen, something waiting. Lucien Voss remained beside her, his presence no longer cloaked in shadow, but it did not fade in the light. It simply changed, becoming sharper, more defined, as if the world itself had to acknowledge him now. Emily took a slow breath, her chest rising steadily, no longer strained, no longer fragile. But there was a weight still lingering. Not from the house, not from Daniel, but from something inside her, something that had not settled yet. "It feels different," she said quietly, her voice calm but uncertain. Lucien turned his gaze toward her, not questioning, not dismissing, simply observing. "Because it is," he replied, the answer simple but layered with meaning. Emily looked down at her hands, turning them slightly, as if expecting to see something new, something visible. But there was nothing, no mark, no sign of the change she could feel. "What exactly did I awaken?" she asked, her voice lower now, more careful. Lucien did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted briefly toward the open space beyond the house, the horizon stretching out in muted tones, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Not something," he said finally. "Someone." The word landed differently, heavier, more precise. Emily's fingers stilled at her sides. "That does not make sense," she said, though the doubt in her voice was weaker than before. Lucien's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes held something deeper now, something that had not been present when he first appeared. "It was not meant to," he said. "The bond you triggered does not follow logic, it follows blood. It follows memory older than your world." Emily felt it again, the subtle pull in her chest, not painful, not overwhelming, but persistent, like a thread connecting her to something she could not see, something she could not yet understand. "You said no one should know that language," she said slowly, piecing together the fragments. "So how do I?" Lucien's gaze returned fully to her now, sharper, more focused. "That is the question," he said quietly. The silence stretched between them again, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with possibility, with something waiting just beyond understanding. Behind them, the house remained still, the open doorway no longer a barrier, just an empty frame. Daniel did not appear. He did not speak. The space he once controlled had already moved on without him. Emily took a step forward, away from the doorway, away from everything that had defined her before. Each movement felt natural now, not forced, not uncertain, as if her body already knew the direction even if her mind did not. "Where do we go?" she asked, her eyes fixed ahead. Lucien did not hesitate this time, his answer immediate. "Somewhere that has answers," he said, but there was something beneath his tone, something quieter, something less certain than before. Emily glanced at him briefly, noticing it, not fully understanding it, but recognizing its presence. "You do not know either," she said softly. Lucien's gaze shifted slightly, not avoiding hers, but not fully meeting it either. "I know where to begin," he replied, which was not the same thing. Emily nodded slowly, accepting the answer for what it was, not complete, but enough for now. The air around them shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like a current moving through space itself. The light flickered faintly, though no source had changed. Emily felt the pull in her chest strengthen just slightly, enough to notice, her breath catching for a moment as her eyes narrowed. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Lucien was already looking toward the distance, his expression sharper now, more alert. "Yes," he said simply, the word carrying more weight than before. The silence returned, but it was no longer calm. It was charged, the kind of silence that came before something revealed itself. Emily's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from awareness, as if something had just noticed her in return. Lucien took a slow step forward, his presence shifting again, not defensive, not aggressive, but ready. "The bond does not just connect you to me," he said quietly. "It announces you." Emily's gaze fixed on the horizon, her breath steady, but deeper now. "To who?" she asked. Lucien did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was lower than before, more deliberate. "To those who have been waiting far longer than you have been alive." The words settled heavily into the air, and for the first time since she stepped out of the darkness, Emily understood this was not a single encounter, not a single change. It was the beginning of something far larger than either of them had planned. The horizon did not stay still. It shifted, subtly, like something vast moving just beyond sight. Emily Carter felt it in the quiet pull inside her chest, no longer faint, no longer uncertain, but present, steady, and undeniable. Her breath slowed, not from calm, but from focus. Her body no longer reacting to fear, but adjusting to something new, something larger than instinct. Lucien Voss stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the same distant point, his expression unreadable, yet sharpened by awareness. They felt it, he said quietly, not as a question, but as confirmation. Emily did not look at him. Her eyes remained forward, as if something in her refused to look away now that it had begun. How far? She asked, her voice steady. Lucien paused briefly, not calculating distance, not measuring space, but sensing something deeper. Far enough that they cannot ignore it, he replied. The answer carried weight, not urgency, but inevitability. Emily nodded slowly, the words settling into place without resistance. Then we do not have time to hesitate, she said. Lucien turned his gaze toward her then, studying her, not as he had before, not as an anomaly, not as a question, but as something that had already crossed a line that could not be undone. No, he agreed simply. The air around them shifted again, not colder, not darker, but more defined, like the world itself was narrowing its focus onto them, onto her. Emily took another step forward, away from the house completely now. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, real, but different, like it recognized her presence in a way it had not before. The pull in her chest guided her subtly, not forcing, not demanding, just pointing her in a direction she could not yet see. Where do we begin? She asked. Lucien's gaze followed the same invisible thread, his expression tightening just slightly, not in concern, but in recognition. There is a place, he said slowly, older than the language you spoke, older than the bond itself. Emily felt the words resonate deep inside her, something stirring in response, something that had been waiting without her knowing. And it knows me, she said quietly, not asking, but understanding. Lucien did not deny it. It knows what you are becoming, he corrected her, his voice low, measured. The distinction mattered. Emily exhaled slowly, the air steady in her lungs, her body no longer resisting the change, no longer questioning it. Behind them, the house stood silent, empty of meaning, the doorway still open, but no longer calling. Daniel did not appear, because whatever held him there no longer reached her. She did not look back. She did not need to. Lucien stepped forward then, matching her pace, not leading, not following, simply moving with her, as if their paths had already aligned long before this moment. When we reach it, she said after a moment, will I understand? Lucien's gaze remained forward. His answer did not come immediately, and when it did, it was quieter than before. You will remember, he said. The word lingered longer than expected. Emily's steps slowed slightly, her brow tightening as something deep within her reacted. Not fully formed, not clear, but undeniable, a flicker of something not from this life, not from anything she could name. Remember what? She asked, her voice softer now. Lucien did not look at her when he answered. What was taken? The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with something waiting just beneath the surface of her thoughts, something that had always been there, hidden, buried, until now. The pull in her chest strengthened again, guiding her forward with more certainty, her heartbeat steady, her breath even, as the world around them seemed to shift subtly with every step, as if it were adjusting to her presence, to what she represented. Lucien's voice came once more, quieter than before, but no less certain. There are those who will not welcome this, he said. Emily did not slow. She did not hesitate. They do not have to, she replied, her voice calm, but unshakable. Lucien's gaze shifted slightly toward her, not fully, but enough to acknowledge the change, the certainty, the quiet strength that had not been there before. No, he said softly. They do not. The horizon ahead darkened just slightly, not with shadow, but with depth, like a doorway not yet visible, but already forming. Emily stepped forward again, her posture steady, her presence no longer small, no longer hidden. And for the first time, the world did not feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she was about to change. And somewhere far beyond sight, something ancient stirred, not in anger, not in fear, but in recognition, as if it had been waiting not for a person, but for a moment. And that moment had finally arrived.